Okay, so I'll let everybody in who wants to come in, because I don't know if anyone else will see that now.
Okay. We have 19 have checked in already, but we have about 50 more to wait.
And we have 4 in the waiting room, so I'll just keep admitting everybody.
Okay, okay, thank you. Sorry to do this last minute. We did get permission from the speaker, as long as it's just for our group, so you can't. Okay. We'll just wait another little bit. So nice to see everybody's faces.
And then Joan, I think if you could just mute everybody, that would be perfect, since now you're the host.
Okay, can't we be co-hosts?
I don't know why it wasn't giving me that option. I'm not sure.
Okay, let's see how many we have. 37 people.
They're
Still
coming
waiting
in
for about
fast
another
and furious.
30. Huh?
People are still really coming in fast. So.
Okay, okay. Well, it's just 1 minute before, so gives me a chance to check everybody off.
So I'm muting everybody, but I've left you with the ability to unmute yourself. And we'll do that in case people end up talking. See how that goes.
Okay, it's 7 o'clock. Sharon, are you here? Sharon, can you unmute?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, how are
Hello.
you? Nice to see you. I'm trying to see, is our speaker here?
I am here.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Nice
Hi.
to see you, Dr. Berman. This is great.
Hi.
Do you want me to go ahead or Dr.
Well,
Berman can introduce herself?
Just give me a minute. I just wanted to make a few announcements just to
Okay,
see.
and my question is for the PowerPoint. How should I do that? Can you then make me the host to do that, or should I just send it to someone right now?
Joan, you're muted.
Joan's our expert.
You should be able to be a panelist and do that.
Let me look. Okay.
Let me see if I can find you here.
I think I can share screen possibly.
Oh yeah, it's a meeting. You should be able to.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's not a webinar, so that should be fine.
Okay.
Okay, so let me get the gallery view, see everybody's faces. Hi, welcome everybody. For those that are new members, hi, I see people waving. It's nice. It's great to see everybody after the summer. Hope everyone was as relaxed and had a great summer vacation. And it's great to see this great outpouring. 70 some people have checked in today. We must miss each other, or it's a really great topic. So welcome again for another year. We have a bunch of meetings lined up. We're actually really signed up for all of them for the whole year, but you have to wait and be surprised to hear about the meetings. I wanted to just thank everybody for trying to help us out by reading the instructions on the memos we send out. It might sound confusing, but the team that's putting these together really have figured out a formula, and it works the best to keep us organized. This past time, the three of us, 3 out of 4 or whatever, we're all out of town. We had to have dates set as a priority of when to RSVP from, when to let us know that you didn't receive the link. And we really are asking really strongly to respect that with us, because it's really uncomfortable to start scrambling, sending links out an hour before the meeting. We are busy also. So let's try and just follow those deadlines, those dates. I know that life gets in the way and sometimes people forget, but just really read through them. Diane spends a lot of time with her red bold to please do it. So again, I'm pleading, and because we're not going to be able to respond to latecomers after this. I think we decided that. So are there any questions about that? Hope everybody understands. I have one announcement that I'd like to just make from, well, actually 2, from Kara Shore. She's one of our members, and she's asking if anybody knows of a speech pathologist that could work with her dad from post-COVID encephalitis. He has word finding, expressive organization, rate of speech, and prosody issues. Anybody in the Rockville, Bethesda, or Potomac area. We also are posting this on our website. So if anybody would like to reach out to her and see if they could help, that would be wonderful. Mentioning the website, Emily is trying to keep it updated. When any of you send me a message about your practice or announcements, to save Diane from having to send out again another flyer, any of those kinds of announcements relating to speech are going to be posted on the website. I believe Diane sent that link out to everybody on this past flyer. So check it. There's some great opportunities, information about upcoming seminars that might be of interest, not ours, but other groups that are doing it. So check that out. Okay, those are my announcements. Anybody else?
Me, Andy, Shelley.
Okay, Shelley. Yes.
I just want to thank everybody. Almost everybody read the directions and made the check out for $20 to me. It's a separate account. For those of you who think it's going into my personal account, it's not. It's an account with just Andy and me for speech. But we weren't, it was really too challenging to keep up the, what's it called? What kind of account did we have in the past, and then we couldn't do it
Business
anymore?
account, and then it became all complicated with IRS information.
Yeah, it was just too much. We're not that big an organization. We're just a bunch of women that are trying to do this. So please understand, it's not going into my personal account. People that ask me, no, I'm not going to Barbados on this money. So, and the mail has been very slow. So when I sent out emails the other night, it was just to everybody that I hadn't received, to remind them that if they signed up, they also have to provide the $20 check. So if you got insulted, I'm sorry. That's just my job to let you know that I hadn't received it yet. So please understand. We're here to help everybody.
Okay, anybody else? Thanks, Shelley. I know.
And I don't have any like memos or anything. It's just snail mail in the mail with a check that I can take to the bank. Thank
We
you.
actually looked to try and do Venmo, and it became also very difficult as a business. I didn't want it in my own personal one, and to set it up as a business also. They want all kinds of tax ID information and it became too complicated. So just bear with us. We're old. We want to have paper checks. So,
Well, and I just want to say, I think I speak for everyone. We so greatly appreciate Andy, you leading us again, and Shelley and Diane and Joan and Marnie, and we really appreciate you guys doing this. It's wonderful. So thank you.
thanks, Janet. Thank you. And by the way, all of you that have written me nice little notes when you say you're coming, I do read them and I do appreciate it. I don't respond because there's a lot of them. And, but I want you to know that I do read it and I appreciate that. And also when I do make mistakes on your name, I'm glad that you let me know that because I'm the one typing it all and the letters start to blend together. And that's why we send out updates to make sure we have it right. Okay. So.
Yeah. Hi, Andy. I just want to say if anybody's looking for some part-time employment with the possibility of becoming more hours, please feel free to reach out to me at CCL. I'll put the info in the chat as well. And Andy and Diane, thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Susan. And just write that up too, and we'll put it onto the website so that it will be, and other people from other discussion groups, you know, have access to that and we'll look at it as well. So it's the best place. Anybody else? Okay, great. Okay, Sharon, are you there? Do you want to, we're so grateful to have Dr. Berman. Do you have any information?
Yes, I just wanted to tell everybody, I received an incredible postcard in the mail, and it said, if you're interested in childhood anxiety disorders, we're having a study, and if you're interested in finding out more about our protocol, call. And I called and I got an instant response, and Dr. Berman and her staff have been incredibly open, and the information they have garnered and continue to garner is especially useful for us because so many of our kids, especially those on the spectrum, have anxiety disorders. So I really appreciate Dr. Berman being here, and her staff has been incredibly helpful in getting this organized. So you're our first meeting. Thank you, Erin.
Of course, I'm glad you have such good things to say. We're pretty efficient. We are for the government. We're pretty efficient. So yes.
Well, yours, so start whenever you want. Let us know what we can do to help. It's as informal as you want it to be. We're all good listeners, and so just take it away.
Okay, sounds good. I'm going to try and do this screen share, and once we get that going, then I'll get moving. So let me just make sure I can get this working. Here, let's see.
Okay, 60 people have signed in. Okay, gotta check.
Okay. It's just going to take me about 2 minutes. I just don't want to bring up my screen right when you were all talking.
Anybody have any gossip while we're waiting?
I'm offering
Andy?
a Google course. If anyone's interested, you can go to innovativespeech.com. If you're interested in becoming more savvy with Google apps.
Thank you.
And Andy, one quick comment. This is Lori Ross. I'm looking for a speech pathologist who has a lot of skills in oral motor and articulation for a client of mine while I'm in therapy, while I'm having surgery. If anyone wants to reach out to me, if they're interested in my client after school.
How old?
He's 7 and he has some oral motor issues and some articulation, L and R, and he's in Bethesda area.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay, can you guys see what I'm sharing? Did I do this right?
Yeah, I
Oh.
see it.
Beautiful. Good. Like this is, I have to say, this has been one of my favorite presentations so far. You guys are laid back. You just go with it. Like from an anxiety disorder therapist to all of you, thank you. This is much better than rehearsing it 5 times because even if you do, guess what? Things happen. So I'm very grateful for already the vibe of this. So I'm Dr. Erin Berman. I am at the National Institute of Mental Health. I'm part of the intramural program. So we're right in lovely Bethesda, Maryland. So not far probably from most of you. And we're not far from, DC and Northern Virginia, except for the traffic. So we have a research study, and we've been there for a very long time. I've been there for 12 years, so it started before I came, and we really focus on brain behavior and anxiety disorders. And to give a quick summary of what we know in general is that the anxiety disorders are pretty treatable, but what we're trying to continue to do with our group at NIMH is create even a more efficient and more innovative, and obviously be able to reach even more kids, because many kids get better with the basic therapy, but many don't. So we're still trying to fine tune treatment. And so we do treatment and fMRI studies there. So this can be pretty informal. I'm happy for people to chat and interrupt. I'm not the best at executive functioning sometimes. So to look at the chat and keep going might be a little challenging. So if anyone sees a question or wants to interrupt me, I will pause a lot, especially when I change slides for questions. So I deal with kids all day, so please interrupt me. I do not mind being interrupted. So, okay, so let's get going. It's to work. There we go. Okay. So most important is, there's so much going on in the world currently. I have tweaked my presentation a little bit, and I will get into a little bit of COVID and anxiety disorders, if that's okay, because I feel like it's pretty relevant of how they're looking and changing, and even just the exacerbation that we're just seeing in general. But most important is kids are challenging and fun. And, I know a lot of you work with kids, so you understand this, but every kid, anxiety is very prevalent. Every kid is different though, and they display it in different ways. So you may see some that are simply, I have my girl on the phone who simply distract, and maybe you never would know they have an anxiety disorder. You have the ones who are, screaming and throwing fits and aggressive and maybe very clear. You have ones that are very quiet. So most importantly, that every kid is different, and we will go through a lot of the different, core symptoms and what to do with. But I am a firm believer that, you don't know it all. That each kid will express their anxiety in a different way. So I did want to go over a little bit of the neuroscience, because that's what we do. And probably many of you are familiar with just neuroscience and how it affects, output in brains and thinking. And most importantly, what I like to show with this certain graph is really the idea of, where is the biggest growth in pruning, right? So we're born, we get a good amount of synapses. You can see our little birth right there. And then as you can see, the biggest work goes from birth. But birth, you see a little bit, but it's a steady one of development and pruning from birth to adolescence. But really where the money is in adolescence, as we can see. And what we mean by this is it's very important, which probably many of you are aware about, how in adolescence, our executive functioning, our prefrontal cortex goes even more awry than other times. And it's not fully formed for a long period of time. Why we want to focus on this, one, to say that anxiety does look different in each developmental kind of age range, right? So not one kid looks, a 5-year-old with anxiety looks very different than a 15-year-old who has anxiety. And that when we're assessing it or understanding it, that we always want to put it in the context of brain development, right? The other end is how do we want to help them? And if I have a 5-year-old, I'm definitely not doing the same amount of cognitive work or helping them think through things as a 15-year-old, as much as even for a 25-year-old. And really how adolescence is quite a time where there's so much growth and so much plasticity overall. And, when it comes to anxiety and stress, most important to kind of see is that our prefrontal cortex is the last to develop. And we really need that prefrontal cortex when we're dealing with anxiety disorders. Why? Because that's all we all know, the brain is developed kind of from the bottom up, right? So our base is eating, sleeping, drinking, our circadian rhythm. The middle is our lovely part where we are, our emotions, right? And then we go all the way, we think then our higher order is all up here, right? Well, in the front, you think about it, base on up. And if we look at the front, we get our lovely, I love this diagram of 5-year-old, preteen, teen, and 20-year-old. We don't really get that frontal lobe, which helps us inhibit behavior or use executive functioning skills. or planning, prioritizing, and rational, right? So that's the big one that I will harp on a bit, is it's very hard many times to get the teen brains to even think rational. I had a girl this afternoon, my 4 o'clock patient, you know, very high schooler, sophomore, and she's, you know, she has to write a 500-word response to Of Mice and Men, right? And she said, I can't even start now. She has a little bit of ADHD, so organizing is a bit of an issue, but it's 500 words, it's not terribly large. And she could just not get over that it couldn't be perfect, that rational part. And I said, you know, tried to reason. So yes, you know, not everyone's is going to be perfect. You know, tried all these responses to help her think it through. And she could get it logically, but she really couldn't come up with it on her own, which is why when we have anxious kids, we do, as our providers or the adults, want to create and say those rational responses, because the front of their brains many times aren't doing them. But I still think and you'll hear me say this over and over again, the action for helping any of these kids with anxiety is really in the behaviors. So she really still, no matter how smart and clear-headed she was, she still couldn't even start writing that essay. Because what if it was wrong? What if it wasn't the right beginning? What if it didn't set the right mood? And when it's too vague, kids with generalized worry have a hard time starting. So even though it's very intelligent and her brain was a little bit more filled in the front than my little ones, had a hard time with rational response. And again, as we can see, we're really not fully formed till about in our 20s, right? Females a little earlier than males overall. Still getting used to this. Okay. So most important is what we do know is where anxiety comes from. It is really interconnected in many parts of the brain. So when I talk about it as being a part of the amygdala, that is true, but it's a bit reductionist. There are many different areas we've come to learn that are really interconnected. And that interconnection between the limbic system, so our emotions, and the front of the brain is really, so those bottom connections, the dorsal, the front, are really where we see most of the action happening. But what we want to realize is that it is, and I use this a lot, it is a misfiring. So our research, I'll show a little bit, is fMRI research. So we do functional magnetic resonance imaging. And what we do see is what the brain is doing in real time when we kind of stimulate it with different things. So it might be, we're showing them a picture of an angry face. We might be showing them a picture of a scary movie. We might be having them listen to a loud scream. All different sensory ways that we tap and be able to see what is lighting up, what's turning on. And we compare our anxious group of kids that we get, which we look at kids 8 to 17. The only reason we start at 8 is because kids have to go in an fMRI, and we find they're not very successful when they're under the age of 8. It's not because anxiety does not exist. So 8 to 17, we get a group of anxious kids, we get healthy kids. We do the same thing to each of them, and then we see kind of what is it that happens, and what is it that lights up. And we do see, so this was a really cool thing that was done many years ago, is we do have an image. As you can see, it's kind of a jumbled image. We kind of flash it in front of them. So they're laying down in the scanner, and they have some glasses so they can see the screen. And what they end up doing is we flash this image very quickly in front of their eyes. It is jumbled, kind of like what you're seeing there. And what we're able to find out is that anxious kids were, even though it was jumbled, they were able to pay attention. So when the face was angry versus neutral, they paid more attention to the angry face, which came back to many, many studies have shown that anxious kids have a bias towards threat. So if they're given a choice between a neutral and an anxious face, their mind does pick up and light up. So they see and feel. And that was back to my girl at 4 o'clock. They said something very, very important. I just feel it though. It just feels bad. Like I can't write it because it feels bad. And it's very important to understand that they are clearly feeling a very strong feeling that is not rational. That's how we kind of defines irrational. It's also beyond the scope of a normal reaction. I mean, no one likes to see an angry face, but it's more turned on and more lit up in individuals with anxiety disorders, kids and adults. We found it in both. So this is just an interesting kind of diagram of what kind of we study, but we do anything from, like we said, loud noises to scary movies. And when we say scary, like they're not scary. It's not like Annabelle or something for adults. It's something like that a child might find a little uncomfortable or upsetting. Any questions or things so far? So.
Can I just ask you that point that individuals with anxiety disorders are drawn more towards the angry face? Do you mean that in general they're drawn, their thoughts are drawn towards negative stimuli? Not just anger, threatening, hostile, war. I mean, you know.
Yes, exactly. There's been plenty of studies that have shown, and more with adults, but you can imagine, because we have to be very careful with kids what we show them, right? Like but you're right. I mean, it is any, so it, you know, another study did, like, yes, images of war, and you might have someone, and not horrible, but you might have for adults, and you might have an adult with an anxiety disorder versus one without, and they will see like a oversensitivity, right? An overreactivity. So it is threat in general. We use faces. The reason we use faces is because we know where the face center of the brain is, right? So we can clear that out when we look at the signal. Does that make sense? That's why we're very focused on just very simple things, but many people have done it with sounds. Yeah, anything loud, threatening, you know, aggressive even. And the other thing we do, which is interesting, is we do eye movement, so we can track their eyes. And if you give them an image with, if you put two images like you see down here, right in front of them, like together, you lay them side by side, their eyes will go avert towards the angry face. You know, the right. So they are very hyper vigilant. That's, yeah, for many areas of threat.
Okay.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm happy to make this like a dialogue because it's much more fun and then relevant for people. So.
Did you ever do it where there was also a happy face?
Yes. Okay. So that's a brilliant question. And that's what we're working on, right? So long story short, we are actually now doing a study. Well, we're on our second study. So we give them cognitive behavioral therapy, and then we're trying to decide if we should train them towards neutral or happy, right? So you're right. And no matter what, when there's an angry face, it doesn't matter if it's neutral or happy. It doesn't matter, right? So, you know, so our idea is, do we need anxious people to pay attention to the positive, like you're saying, happy, or do we need them to pay attention to more neutral? And it seems like we want more neutral, you know, but the anger face will always supersede. And then if you have a neutral and a happy, then they're more likely to perceive the neutral just also as threatening. Does that make sense? So.
Interesting.
Okay, move on. So I did want to bring up our global prevalence because it was a study that came out, just came out like a few weeks ago. And they looked at global because everyone's just curious, since we're NIMH and that's what we're interested in, of how bad has, you know, the epidemic had on mental health. And I think we'll continue to see it. They did a meta-analysis of the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic. So they took a bunch of different studies from all over the globe. This was global prevalence, not just the US. And they did find 1 in 4 youth has significant depressive symptoms, and 1 in 5 experienced clinically elevated anxiety symptoms. So the depressive symptoms, they didn't all have to meet criteria for major depressive disorder, those kids, the 1 in 4, but they had either loneliness, sadness, you know, sleep disturbances, eating disturbances, but 1 in 5 did experience clinically leveled anxiety symptoms. So it is true that kind of this is having a global impact on kids, and, you know, we'll get into more details of why, but I'm sure many of you who are, you know, clinicians can see why already. Also, I do always want to treat us adults, and adults obviously have had the same issue, if not, as well as the kids. And so during late June, 40% of adults reported struggling with mental health or substance use issues as well. That's a pretty high number. The main one, as you can see, is anxiety and depressive symptoms, trauma or stressors related, whether it was death of a loved one, loss of money or finances. Started an increase in substance use was 13%, and seriously considered suicide was 11%. So, you know, the mental health, what you will see walking across you or even in your family is, you know, it is pretty, everyone's at an increased rate right now for a lot of these symptoms. So why, you know, what can you do? And luckily, you know, it seems like in many ways we're starting to gain some traction on the epidemic, but I do think all of these things for us as parents or clinicians or just as humans in the world are very important, is that we want to make sure we can focus on what we can control. You know, I know I've had a lot of parents very stressed about children being in and out of school in quarantine and not in quarantine, and, you know, not having consistency, and that can really exacerbate all our feelings of depression and anxiety. And It's not something that we have to just readily accept. I think a lot of parents at the beginning realized that there were many rules that they need to fix with the quarantine and kids in school, but we want to focus on what we can control, right? And it's natural still to have, I think, a level of fear and anxiety. Make sure that you're not focusing just on one thing in your life. That will always drive us all crazy. I'm a big advocate of turning off news and social media, and specifically for the kids and the adolescents for sure. We do know it has quite a significant impact on their mental health and will exacerbate symptoms of anxiety and depression if they already kind of have a predisposition or have experienced some trauma. And practicing acceptance, what I mean by that, and all my teenage clients always say, I can't accept that things are bad. No, you don't. Acceptance just means looking at it clearly, see what's in front of you, not freaking out, so then you can solve the problem better. So, what can you do if you've got an anxious kid in front of you while you're working or an anxious kid at home? Model behavior and problem solving. Because when we feel anxious, like we show, the amygdala is lighting up, no one's engaging their frontal lobe. So even if we have, and I try to do this all the time in session, even if we have a kid who really in that moment cannot think rationally or is panicking or is just stuck in a moment or just quiet, you modeling the behavior is terribly powerful to having them understand how to cope with things. The social belonging is terribly important. We knew this prior to the pandemic. This is probably a big reason why there was an increase in anxiety and depression, right? Because you couldn't have the same level of belongingness, or as we're talking with obviously all of you, practice in communication and speech. If you don't have practice, you can't get very good at all levels of social connection, right? And a lot of these kids are out of practice, didn't have the opportunity to practice. So that's such a core part of, keeping children connected and protected for their mental health. Positive peer support. Again, these are the big things that really help kids be protected from anxiety and depression. That was probably not present many times in COVID while there was social distancing. And we'll talk a little bit more about boundaries modeling. That's more for later on, about how as a clinician or a parent, and you guys all probably are very familiar with, boundaries. If a parent's calling you all the time, what do I do with this kid? What do I do with that kid? Just making sure that we're being non-reactive and we're taking good care of ourselves and not, letting people invade on us too much. And that's, I know, not hard after we've had a lot of time being apart. So any questions or comments as I get to my next slide? So what do we see, right? We see all types of symptoms that can be indicative of anxiety or depression. Worrying before, these are the common ones we'll hear. Worrying before or after events. Irritability, a very common one, right? So when we know the amygdala turns on, that is a fight, flight, or freeze response. That's always a good way to conceptualize behavior with kids and to see if they are anxious. It can be any of those three, right? Or all of those three. Many kids, I'll say, they'll be like, no, I freeze, right? I'm scared. I don't know what to say, right? Irritability or fight, I feel, kind of go hand in hand, right? I don't know what to do. I feel like a trapped animal, get irritable, angry, especially you're going to see that more at home or with parents, right? Or siblings, the irritability, than your peers. But you may see it sometimes with peers. And we have freeze, fight, or flight, which is still avoidance. They kind of just run, disappear. Avoidance and avoidance. So irritability can be definitely a sign. If you're always anxious, you're not very relaxed. Problem sleeping is one of my bigger ones that I'll hear on a regular basis for kids. Problems being alone. That's not all, but our separation kids, which I'll go into a little bit, they might be nervous and scared and uncomfortable being alone. This has actually had quite an uptick after the pandemic, as we can all guess, right? Because they were home with their parents or grandma or grandpa, or, they had those Wednesdays off where they had asynchronous learning. So they could always look forward to that. So, that the rise in separation anxiety has been quite significant. Even if these kids are like, I don't know why I miss my mom. They don't, they love her, but they, that these anxiety symptoms probably were cultivated from not being able to go into school often. Don't like being the center of attention. Those are our socially anxious kids. Avoid raising their hands in class or talking in class, which again, we talk about since you guys are in the context of speech, practice. And if we can't practice, we can't get better. We can't get more comfortable, right? So anxiety really impedes many ways that kids need to improve in their life when they can't practice. Panic, freezing, butterflies, fight or flight response, problems concentrating, and a lot of physical symptoms, stomach ache, headache, nausea, needing to go to the bathroom. All those are very typical symptoms of an anxious child. So when does it become a disorder? When do we need to worry about it, right? Because we all have amygdalas, right? No one removed those, so that's good. We all have them and we all need them. So we all have anxiety to some extent, right? So when does it become problematic for, this is the same for child, adolescents, or adults? When there's significant avoidance, right? And in the context of learning and communication, this is a problem, right? They're not talking, not raising their hands, not speaking to the neighbor, not speaking to their friends. They're losing that ability to practice and get better and mastery, but they're also not getting used to it and comfortable in terms of anxiety, right? Interference. So this is usually when the parents bring them in, right? Because they're either, my separation kids, they're still sleeping with the parents every night and the parents can't, not everyone can fit in the bed, or they're having to drag them off of them from school. I can't tell you how many schools have called me. This kid's not going into school. He's standing outside. He's running away. They need to go to school, right? What are the things they need to do? School, I would say, activities and friends are what kids need to do. And when there's a real interference in any of those, it can be an anxiety disorder and distressing. You may not always see it in certain situations. Many of these kids hold it together well at school. The teachers say, I don't see anxiety. They're quiet and they're happy in the corner. Maybe they are quiet, whether that's good or bad for them. But the distress you see more at home, more likely if it's an anxiety disorder. But there are some kids who will obviously act out at school as well. And more importantly, transient versus persistent. So again, if we have a week or two or something we see horrible in the news and it impacts us for a week, that's different. We may not have an anxiety disorder and we can become avoidant or distressed for the entire week. It's transient versus persistent. We usually give things about 3 months, right, of symptoms. That is a bit of time, but many things will resolve. As probably many of you are aware, kids adjust in September, maybe have a hard September and hard mid-October, but then they get into the groove by the end of October and November. So we do really look for about 3 months of symptoms, unless it's terribly interfering, like we have kids who are school refusing. Then, we'll address it obviously right away in that situation. Or, anxious kids sometimes get so nervous they won't eat. Then that's one that we would address right away. There are certain symptoms we would not probably wait for those 3 months. And as we said, we looked into the numbers. It's still about a quarter of lifetime prevalence. So 1 in 4 will carry a diagnosis at one point in their life, anxiety disorder diagnosis. So they're very common. So what are our disorders? We have separation anxiety disorder, which is more in the littles, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. We have generalized anxiety disorder, which are our little worriers or big worriers. Social anxiety disorder. These are our kids who, and again, I'll go into more detail as I go into the diagnosis and the symptoms. Some are talkers and chatters and some aren't. So again, it looks very different in each individual, but they have a hard time either talking to their peers or adults or a mix of both. And under that same vein, there are also kids who have selective mutism, who will speak only in the home, but not out and about. We have specific phobia, which surprisingly can be very interfering. Dog phobias, needle phobias, heights, bugs are just any of my bug phobics. It's horrible in the summer. They're feeling better now, but it's an important one to address. Sounds, so specific phobias, afraid of the dark. Panic disorder, which is really the fear of fear, which is the fear of having a panic attack. That is more common in older kids, so more in adolescents. We see that less prevalent in the young kids. Young kids may actually have panic attacks, but most likely they usually don't meet criteria for panic disorder. As we said, selective mutism. So those are children who are not speaking or speaking very little, if anything, at school or out of the home environment. So separation anxiety, our first one. Developmentally inappropriate and excessive anxiety about separation from the caregiver. So we have developmentally inappropriate. So, some little ones, the real tiny ones, they're going to have issues. That's not weird, right? We want to always keep all of these symptoms in a developmental perspective, right? It's super important that We just don't pop it on ours, on all of them. I've seen it as young as, 5, 6, or 7, where they have to go to school and they're having issues going to school. And definitely I've had separation kids as old as 18, 19, where they have to go off to college and now they're finally coming to terms that, they're not going to know everywhere that mom was, everywhere that she would be, and not being able to leave the home. It's more common though in the younger kids, more common in girls. And usually these are the things that you're going to hear. Right? You're going to hear that they're afraid of themselves. So someone coming in and kidnapping them. They're afraid of maybe someone burning their house down, afraid otherwise about their family. So my 18, 19-year-olds usually are not worried about their house down, or maybe usually not so much about someone breaking in, but more fall on what happens to mom, what will happen to dad, what if they're in a car accident, themes of monsters and illness. So mom getting sick, dad getting an illness, the monster under my bed is more for the little ones, and natural disasters and driving safety. What if a hurricane, what if a tornado or a hurricane hits our house? Really that concern of their home being disrupted and someone being in danger. They come with a lot of compensatory strategies. So again, these are the kids who are sleeping in mom's bed, or mom has to do a huge ritual, or dad or grandma before they go to bed. Those rituals, the staying with the kid, those are all forms of avoidance, so they don't feel the anxiety. And again, we wouldn't really make that. If your kid just needs a kiss and an arm rub for 10 minutes, that's different. And it doesn't interfere, fine. They stay in your bed, fine. And they come in maybe at 5 a.m, you're okay with it, fine. That's it. But it's the kid who has a long ritual before they go to bed, or they can't go to school, or they're upset when they're in school for an extended period of time. And many times these kids will also mix separation anxiety with oppositional defiant disorder, which is a lot of fun for those parents. So, any questions on these kids? And again, they're pretty typical. A lot of kids do developmentally grow out of it. Many will come and see me, but many too with just different desires and different things that they want to push through, but may make it through without any treatment. So we have our generalized anxiety kids. These are our little old souls, our little worriers. It was my perfectionist that I was talking about who couldn't start her 300, 500 word essay, even though the teacher was very clear on what to do. It's excessive worry. She was excessively worried about one thing, right? So excessive worry more days than not for at least 6 months about a number of events, right? So she's worried about writing this essay, worried about making new friends, worried about standing awkwardly in front of her musical performance. So just a constant kind of chatter in their brain of things that are worrying, concerning, upsetting. On top of just having those worries, these kids have usually a significant amount of physical symptoms as well. So imagine if your brain is always like kind of revved up, headaches, stomach aches, nausea, difficulty concentrating, muscle tension, sleep disturbances. So you have to have a significant amount of physiological symptoms, which you can see in the second criteria, to make a diagnosis. It's not just worriers, and it has to be obviously distressing or impairing. So my girl this afternoon is completely avoiding her work. That's interfering. If that's, you have to be finishing your schoolwork. And that's why I always like to harp on the idea that perfectionists can look 2 different ways. She just avoids, puts her hands up. Her standards are very high. And that's what stops her. Or we have our perfectionists who I get rolling the door and all their work is done, but they are up till God knows when, doing their homework, making sure everything's right. And that would impair sleep, concentration, all that kind of stuff. So you can also overcompensate. So avoidance can even look as an overcompensation, make sure you get everything right, or a complete, well, if I don't do it, then I don't have to face that fear and uncomfortable. It also can just be, have nothing to do with schoolwork and perfectionists. It can be the little kids who my other ones worry about, all the different diseases out there, or what food has the most current salmonella warning. You know, I think it's onions. I think I'm on top of it usually. He keeps me up to date. So it's, you know, it's like that. It can also just be the state of the world, animal cruelty, but not just, oh, they think about it and they do something about it, or they think about it and they read about it. But I think the bigger thing is obsess, and more days than not. So hopefully that gives you a better idea of our little GAD kids. Also big, you know, it's common in adults as well. So it's never linked to just one situation, and they're distressed over a number of things: health of the family member, tests at school, performance, and some are future oriented and some are not. Like my girl this afternoon didn't care about the future. Just right now, all those assignments were just too overwhelming.
Erin, can I ask a quick question? I work at a practice with a lot of young adults and teenagers who have that perfectionistic thinking, and a lot of them end up diagnosed with OCD. So I'm just curious how many of these kids that you see, or teenagers that start with GAD that have that perfectionistic thinking, go on to have OCD diagnoses.
Yeah, so there's a big debate just in general, because a lot of people think that GAD may just be kind of like the precursor to OCD in many of these kids. And it depends on how tricky of it, like how precise. One, it's hard to make that cut, honestly. And it's a really good point, because with OCD, if you're really sticking by the rules, which we do excessively because we're a research setting more than anywhere else, like, so I'm going to be very, you know, kind of, a lot of people aren't, like, we cut off, if they have to have an hour of compulsions a day to really hit that OCD. But it is very common for them as young, 8, 9, 10, to then like have this rumination, and then it turn into more OCD. And many times we'll get kids with GAD and OCD as well.
Okay.
So you can have both too. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. These are the little self-critical kids or adults or teenagers. The perfectionists, like we said, they fail or they overachieve and are some are very future oriented. So what if? That's how you usually can tell. Maybe that's actually, now that we're at a good place where OCD versus GAD, that's kind of where I kind of make that, like, you can hear that difference, is we've got the what ifers are more the GADers. The OCDers are like, I am touching this and I'm going to get, you know, some disease, or like I need to, they have a little more sometimes concrete worry, but they do what if everything. What if I don't do well on a test? What if I get sick tomorrow? What if I don't understand the assignment? What if I get a bad grade? What if I said something wrong? What if we run out of money? What if my parents get divorced? What if the teacher doesn't like me? What if I don't get into college since I got a bad grade? So very catastrophic what if kind of thinking. And we have our socially anxious kids, most common in adolescents, and it's probably the higher rate of diagnoses in adolescents over GAD and separation anxiety. These are our silent sufferers. I always feel like my GADs are always the little like professors or the little old souls. And so they're telling everyone how they feel. Not all of them. If they have generalized anxiety and social anxiety, maybe they won't. But our socially anxious kids, some are very talkative, but a lot aren't. And they kind of go clearly unnoticed in the classroom for sure, because they're quiet and they're well behaved, right? They're not, you know, rocking the boat. They're not moving things. If anything, they are thoughtful and they pay attention. You know, they have an excessive fear of social evaluation or embarrassment. So as I was saying, my 4 o'clock, I'll just call her that because it's just easier, also had social anxiety, and it was really, you know, classic good adolescent example is met a girl. One of the girls said hi to her one day. Then what happened and what followed was I said, well, say hi to her next week. And she waved. And she's like, well, she didn't wave back. She didn't smile. Okay, well, a wave. Again, maybe in adolescents, teenagers, maybe they did totally ignore her. It is very possible, right? But also just this, after a year and a half of COVID, who knows if people are even smiling, or with a mask, you can't even tell. Like, there's so much lost now of practice and socialization that, you know, these poor kids, my slide is here, you know, really it's inflamed because they've been avoidant and they've had to avoid, and it still feels very bad. So again, these kids can just simply So, you know, many of my patients will be fine with me or fine with you, but when it comes to their peers, it's crushing. And again, we really need kids to have social connections, right, of their peers. That's terribly important and protective against depression. It's honestly terribly important against protecting about anxiety. You know, they don't have to have 15, 20 friends. They don't have to throw parties. They just need a couple good ones. You know, I always tell my social anxiety, don't worry, I'm not coming in to change you in therapy, but we need you to have a few so you feel like you have someone to bounce ideas off or feel comfortable with. Some will only be afraid of adults. They'll be fine with their peers. So you'll also see that where they won't talk to teachers. They're afraid of the negative evaluation, afraid of raising their hands, afraid of being wrong. You can also have them afraid of everything, you know, both parents or both adults and peers. And you have plenty of performers who either way, I have ones who are terrified of playing piano. I have one right now, that's what we're working on, practicing our piano in front of people. But I have others who are happy to play piano because it's like, I can practice. It's not like real life where there's unscript, you know? So you have to realize it's very subtle for each kid and really own that their version of social anxiety is legit. As we know, a lot of famous actors and actresses have significant social anxiety because they have a script or they can be someone else. You know, they don't have to be themselves. But it's a very damaging disorder. Sorry if you hear my cat, now she's coming in. So I may have to let her in here in a minute. But it is in a way that it is, you know, predictive of depression in later life and predictive of substance use as well, because they don't reach out and have kind of those social connections.
Erin, there is a question in the chat by Kava. How does pathological demand avoidance fit in with anxiety?
Well, yes. I mean, it does. It exacerbates it for sure. Like, I mean, yes. You know, it could fit in with any of these, honestly, diagnoses and contribute to any of these diagnoses. Any more detail that you want to know about that? I mean, it's 100% has an impact, yes. Or more that we want to talk about that, because I think that's a really good point.
I mean, I wasn't the one with the question, so
Okay.
I'm just reading what I see in the chat.
Okay, perfect. We can go on and hopefully they can clarify more and ask more as we go on too, because I think that's a really good discussion topic. But in general, it has a very simple, you know, impact on anxiety, and specifically in children and adolescents more than even adults. So social anxiety and impact on communication, right? So avoidance can lead to significant delays in multiple aspects of communication, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, right? And this is where I see the diagnoses, also GAD and OCD, of course, but really having an impact on clearly what all of you do as well. There's lack of practice and lack of opportunity. And so the social anxiety would have to be addressed to be able to do and have them learn and do what they need to be doing. It inhibits the development of verbal and nonverbal communication. So there's a number of studies that it delays that as well. It obviously doesn't cause initial issues, but it will delay the development, right? And good communication is obviously essential. You'll hear me keep harping on this one, and I'm sure you all agree, for kids to build a social support network, right? And if they don't have that, for whatever reasons the delays are, you know, social anxiety does seem to have a significant impact on that. I do want to talk about panic disorder for a minute. It is one that is common and not uncommon in adolescents. It's going to be less common in the little ones. As you hear from me, I'm going to be a little bit more nitpicky with the diagnosis because of what we do. We really want to put people in the like specific category at our research institution. But many people talk about, I'm having a panic attack or I'm having panic disorder. It's really a panic attack doesn't equal panic disorder, just so you have that good knowledge. A panic disorder often has like a waxing and waning course. So they may be horrible for 2 weeks, and this may be causing the school refusal. Honestly, it can be just simply panic attacks, uncued panic attacks, and that they connect it to the school. This is very common in older individuals with driving. So they have a panic attack in their car, and then they have that feeling and they pull off the road and they say they're never going to drive again. Right. So it has a waxing and waning course. That's one thing we really do want to remember, because we can have 2 horrible weeks. But the most important thing with panic, if they're having panic in that setting, wherever it is, they have to go back to that setting, right? So if I have an adult who needs to drive and they've had panic, you are going to get back in that car with me and you're going to drive, because the avoidance only breeds it longer and longer. And it's a fear of having the physical symptoms. It's a fear like this you'll hear maybe in my high school kids, fear of either vomiting on themselves or having an accident. It goes very common hand in hand with IBS, right? So it's this anxiety sensitivity where they are feeling the physical symptoms and they're afraid of the physical symptoms. So like I said, the average onset age is teens, but also definitely there's a couple other waves of it where we have it in young adult and also middle age as well you can have. And the treatment is interoceptive exposure. So we'll talk a little bit about cognitive behavioral therapy and what I do, but it's really exposing individuals to the physical symptoms they don't like. And that's just the main way to tease out and to work on that disorder. But you can have panic attacks in the context of social anxiety or generalized anxiety, or for sure separation. You're going to see these kids freak out, but it's not necessarily panic disorder. And I know you guys have probably multiple diagnoses, kids, adults that you see. And so I always, we could spend a whole lecture just on that. Like, how do you tease out and how do you approach the different diagnoses? Do you treat anxiety? People always ask, at least when I talk to the parents, you treat ADHD first or anxiety first, or, really work on the executive functioning, which order do you do things? And all I want to show is this really interesting study that was done is it's all kind of intertwined. So it really looked at anxiety, children with, anxiety disorders, a group of that, children with ADHD, and obviously with no psychiatric disorders. So compared all three. And what was really interesting is children with anxiety disorders. This was solely, right? So this was a study where we didn't have any comorbid conditions, right? So just the anxiety group, right? Impaired executive functioning compared with the disorder-free kids. So just so we're all aware, we may have a kid who doesn't have, ADHD, but may kind of look like that a bit. And that may be anxiety disorder related. Among the disorder-free children, executive attention was less efficient in those with high relative to low levels of anxiety. So what's interesting in this, right? This is talking about just the disorder-free kids. This is not even talking about the anxiety disorder kids. If you have a kid who's just experiencing higher levels of anxiety, their executive attention is going down. Probably why, for me, when I give a presentation, it's harder for me to, my executive functioning goes down a bit. I'm definitely more anxious now than I normally am laying on my couch watching Netflix, right? Where my executive functioning is probably shining at that moment because I'm more relaxed, right? So it's really important to see how anxiety can really have quite an impact on executive functioning. And the last part is very interesting too. Impaired executive attention in children showed specific associations with anxiety and ADHD. So sometimes it's hard to tease these apart, in other words. And yeah, there's no quick and easy way. That's why I always love a good neuropsychological exam. If I can get a kid that's got one of those, that's got a really great one, that can help me tease that apart, because those are pretty good at looking at the pure attentional issues. But it's tricky. And once you get one diagnosis, as we know too, you're more likely to have another. Right. And so it's very important for us to just be aware that maybe it's only, and it's sometimes is only ADHD. And once we treat that ADHD, the anxiety's gone, because now they can focus in school and now they don't hate school as much. So the physical symptoms of anxiety, right? Just so everyone is kind of aware and on top of things, it's anything really. Stomach aches, headaches, nausea. I'm running into this intense right now with my school refusers, because I have to have them in school all the time on a regular basis every day for them to really habituate, really get used to, right? Being there. And between COVID, if a classmate gets COVID-19, they shut a classroom, or look at the beginning of the school year, how many kids did I have stomach aches and headaches, and they were just anxious, and the nurse would send them home, and it would screw my school refusal protocol. I get it. And it's 100% correct what the nurse is doing. So I'm not pushing back against the healthcare, but it's just showing you how these symptoms are really they used to throw a wrench anyway in my treatment, but now it's even harder. Most important is if you're having a kid next to you, sitting next to you, or your own child or an adult, really important for everyone to know if they're having a panic attack or freaking out for whatever reason, whether it's just trying to get into school or trying to say something in a session, remind them you cannot stop anxiety, right? We cannot remove it all the way. Okay. So most important is you can't stop it, right? If we try and stop it, say stop, it makes it worse usually. okay, I'm trying. And the kid's trying, the parents are trying, and then everyone blows up. So, whenever anyone calls me and they're like, my kid's panicking, I'm like very slow and calm, because not because I am in general, but we have to do the opposite, right? So listen, don't talk a lot. Do not instruct those kids much at all. Nope, not at all. It's on the phone with a kid Friday morning. He's laying on the couch, won't go to school. Put your feet on the floor. You gotta sit at the dining room table. That's it. Like, because gosh, the couch is wonderful. Like, of course, that's not helping. Don't lay on a couch ever. It's too relaxing, right? But don't talk a lot. And then I just let him kind of talk. Okay, sit at the table and tell me how you're feeling. Okay, 10 minutes later. So be a calming influence. Remind them that this ends. If you cannot be calm, go get someone who's calm. If you don't have anyone else, go get the dog or the cat or the bird, whatever it is. But remind yourself, if you can't be calm, that's okay. You're human. But just try and throw something in there that might be calming. And the last concept is grounding. Just if someone is really freaking out in front of you, if you Google it, there's like 500 million ways to ground, but it's something like sensory, right? So what can you smell right now? What can you see? Can you see the cell that color red? Can you tell me what's red in this room? Okay, that picture. Yellow in this room. Okay, that fish. Green in this room. Okay, that plant. Can you bring them back sensory wise? Ice, cold packs, those are wonderful, honestly, to ground someone, just to kind of get them back into their body. Even I use, kids love this one. You can use dum-dums. Okay. Like they're like, oh, I'm gonna have a panic attack again with Dr. Berman. It's not that easy because I can tell a real one, but let's like suck on this candy, get some minty gum is like ideal, so just, different ways. We want to really more focus on sensory when things are going awry than obviously talking, and parents just continue to talk. Just like my husband too. He will just talk to them. And I'm like, please, I love you, but they're freaking out. Walk away. You can talk to them in the morning. You have great ideas. I always tell them, you're great, but don't do it now. Like, it's not helping anyone. So just in case you're running into, yeah, go ahead, please. Mhm.
Is grounding, is it anywhere similar to like being mindful or mindfulness?
Yes, very similar. It's kind of come out of that, yeah. But when I get kids and I tell them the word mindfulness, at least my cranky teenagers, they tell me I don't want to do it. So that's why I use grounding as more of a different way to say it. They rarely want to breathe. They look at me like I'm crazy. So unless you get, some of them are very, very in peace. But I agree, it is very mindfulness based, right? So Any other questions or comments? So what do we really want to do? What do we want to impart with these kids if they're sitting next to us, or just in general? I mean, you guys get to see and meet them all the time. So how do we want to really focus? We want them, again, to understand. Parents love this when I bring them into the session. I said, we're not going to remove anxiety. And the kids are always great at understanding this much quicker many times than the parents. I'll say, what if I removed your amygdala? And the kids they're great. They'll be like, oh, then I would I would go like jump off this like high dive over here, and I wouldn't even think about it. Or I would go steal all my mom's candy. Or like, if you don't have anxiety, you don't have any feedback. We need that, right? So when you work with a kid with anxiety, I don't ever get the expectation that it's going to go away all the way. We want to walk with it next to us, right? We want to make sure that kids understand. The more you normalize it, because every single one of my sweet kids from 8 to 80, they're not kids anymore, will be like, I'm the only one, I'm the weird one, like I'm the only one who has a hard time going to school. So normalizing it for you and your child or whoever you're working with, and that we're going to cope with anxiety versus fight it, because the more we fight against it, the bigger it gets. It's like that fight versus fight. It's not helpful. I don't tend to like to use that. We're going to cope. And anxiety can be a small or a big glitch that I want everyone to kind of understand. It can be simple as like I said, I have plenty of patients who have, bug phobias. It can be simple in that it doesn't happen all the time, or it can be a big brain glitch like our generalized anxiety kids. And having them understand that is many times happens at different times in their life, because maybe their brain's not connected so well. Maybe they don't sleep enough. Maybe they don't have enough bandwidth, enough social support. Again, there's a really interesting study done with behaviorally inhibited children, and behavioral inhibition is something that we can identify at a very early age, right? As early as 3 months to 6 months old. And these are kids who, when they do study them, these are the kids that don't like novel things, right? So you put them in a room in like an experiment and you put out even new toys. They don't like that. They feel uncomfortable. Their mom goes farther away. They don't like that, right? So there was a neat study done by, if anyone's interested in this stuff, Nathan Fox, like the animal Fox at University of Maryland, did a phenomenal amount of really good longitudinal studies. So we know like what happens to these kids, right? And we scan them at ages 18, and I think we're currently scanning them again, so they must be older. And one of the just anecdotes that I think is just good to know is many of the kids that did have behavioral inhibition as young, very young, did go on to develop mood and anxiety disorders. But one of the interesting protective factors that was really neat was having that social support within any outside activity. So that could be sports, that could be chess, it could be music. But one thing that they found is like a protective thing that they could follow through is having those kids. And it makes sense. These inhibited, shy kids may not be part of those activities. And so I always try and push that, whatever it is the kid likes. And I'm not trying to change the kid, but just letting them know that connection with people can really help handle these different brain glitches. This was terribly problematic during, the height of kind of our quarantine and everyone being socially distanced. But even now, we cannot cope well with anxiety if the sleep cycle is off. So that's one of the first ones I always check in. A recent study just came out that really exercise can reduce anxiety disorders by a very significant amount. So exercise every day, terribly important, especially for the little ones, right? And the adolescents. Time alone. So just having a break, not always to being on demand, being outside and eating and social connections. So this is really, when I have any individual that's coming into my office, yes, it's very important that we're working on the cognitive thoughts and what behaviors to do, but all these other things have to really be checked off, or it doesn't matter kind of what magic I'm doing in session. One really thing for them to know, but also for the caretakers, this is super important to me for the caretakers, is change the way we all relate to anxiety, right? So rescuing a kid, whether it's at school, whether it's in any situation, we really, all of us as a practitioner or a parent, want to have them mess up and learn. We want them to have failure. It's even better if we have it when they're near us, right? But it's the versus in college. If they have their first failure in college, oh, it's rough when they're by themselves. And the way we have them, we understand it. And the way we think that failure is okay, and failure just means, messing up, right? When I'm saying it's a big dark word, but it's messing up, is then they can learn to problem solve and rehearse, and you can be next to them and you can be their frontal lobes. Because remember, the executive functioning is not fully there, even for our kids without ADHD and anxiety, right? And it makes it even more challenging with ADHD and anxiety. That initial slide that I showed you, those were just individuals that didn't have a diagnosis, right? And it took that long for their frontal lobes and those executive functionings to really set in. Problem solving is really one of the best things that we can teach them, because if they've either over avoided, right? So they haven't done anything because they haven't messed up because they didn't do anything, then they're never learning how to problem solve. Or they're the ones that completely overcompensate. They do a million things, so they never get a B. They're never going to learn like, oh, I got a C. Well, how do I deal with this? What do I do? Do I talk to the teacher? And that's why we also don't want to swoop in as adults. We want to say, when it's time to problem solving, say, what are the 3 different things that you could do? Okay, so you don't have to do this assignment. Fine, that's 1. You could ask the teacher for help 2. You could have your mom write it 3. And I am not silly and ridiculous, but want them to come up with a million different ways to problem solve, and then we'll practice it in session, and then they pick the one that would be best. Also, you see my big push from research. We really want kids to have a broader social net than just 1 or 2 people that they go to, right? So they have a teacher, parent, counselor at school, but we don't want just 1. So I don't want to be the only support for all my patients, medical professionals, friends, like always identifying when you're having an issue that's more than 1 person, right? Because anxiety tells us it's dangerous to be alone, it's dangerous to be by ourselves. And so if we only pick 1 person, and that person many times, mom, if it just becomes mom or just becomes grandma, who's the main person to solve, and grandma or mom are either sick or tired or have to go to work, we want them to learn to be very multifaceted in their approach to solving problems. We want to support them with a new mindset, right? Which is getting more traction, right? They're having kind of that idea of that growth mindset, and more people are pushing this and thinking this way. But it's very hard many times for kids to do this when they see other kids just doing really well. But experience is the name everyone gives to their mistakes. And I really hope, that's what we want these kids, whether they're socially anxious kids who are afraid of someone not responding back to them, or them saying something silly or making a mistake in class, or our generalized anxiety kids who are afraid of turning in an assignment that might not be perfect. We want to make sure we're tapping into these things, that they're not as self-critical, and that we watch these kids who are self-critical or perfectionistic and future-oriented, and help them understand that mistakes are good. Again, when a kid is having a strong emotion, we want to approach it more as a coach versus an expert. Sometimes we need to be an expert on topics. I'm an expert, I would say to them, sometimes on the skills, but not on their anxiety. And even with parents, parents are experts on their kids. I'm an expert on what you need to do, but I'm not an expert on understanding. You'll have to tell me. So active listening and helping them express feelings is terribly important. I can't tell you how many anxious kids just funnel all their feelings into anxiety when they could just be annoyed at a friend versus thinking they hate them. Or anxious, they don't want to do something, maybe they're depressed, and we have to figure out how to deal with depression. So we really want to help them express the individual feelings they're having. And many times we'll role play situations to help elicit these things. And again, just kind of reiterating, instructing that there are adults or friends that are good buffers in hard situations. So we want to make sure that there's not just one person that kid goes to. Because again, with an anxiety disorder and you only have one person, that really kind of feels like you're confined. So we want to make sure kids are flexible in their coping. So school, home, anywhere, these are the big things we want to know. What do you want to do, right? What should we do versus don't do? So as a practitioner, as a parent, as a teacher, we want to be sensitive, right? We want to listen. We don't want to say, oh, you don't need to worry about that. We want to educate ourselves. That's why we're here. We're reading about it or learning about it or talking to other people about it. We can educate ourselves in a million different ways. Give positive feedback to these kids. If they're next to you in your office, they need all the positive feedback they can get, because they already feel like they're doing everything wrong, or it feels like, even if they aren't, it feels like they're doing everything wrong. Again, we said be calm. If you can't be calm, like I said, leave the room. It's okay. Calm down, then come back. Be consistent. And as we said, you heard me just kind of go on my little tangent. Focus on problem solving skills. So what can we do? Is there anything we can do? I mean, 90% of the time, there's something we can do. We may not like the solution, and I always impart that on them. They may not like what the solution is, but there's always something we can do, right? Don't, as me as a therapist, as a practitioner, don't accommodate too much. So don't let them avoid, don't let them avoid the situations that are pretty okay. My 4:00 girl, I'll tell you, I said, well, okay, what's the topic of your 500, 300 word thing? Okay, it's this. Okay. Why don't you write the first sentence? She wouldn't even do that. And I understood, because I kind of just sprung it on her. This was only like one of the first sessions where what I do specifically in the protocol many times is in cognitive behavioral therapy, we want to do exposure, right? We want them to practice what scares them. So I want them to do the thing that's making them uncomfortable. So just do in front of me, like, right, once upon a time, this mouse, jumped into this bowl of milk. Like, I didn't even care. I was like, I don't even care. Just write something down. She couldn't even do that. Frozen, right? Frozen. And it's just me. Like, I know her now, known her long enough. So instead of, and I said, okay, well, that's a little too hard for you. Fine. But we need to do something. So I said, well, why don't you tell me a story that you just read then? And she didn't want to mess it up or think about it. But then I had her just do that. Like, you have to, anywhere we like let a little subtle avoidance go on, makes that anxiety know, oh, see, yeah, that's the way I should cope. And so, you don't all have to be expert on this, but I do think watching their level of avoidance and walking that fine of being compassionate and sensitive, but also pushing them at the same time. Don't, single the child out or ridicule. That's more likely, something that doesn't usually happen, but can happen in school settings where you have a shy child. Or when I first started, in NIH, I remember one time, we get an anxious kid that just gets plopped in front of us and we have to kind of assess. And she had this awesome, it was kind of out of character, but she had this super cute bow. Like it was this awesome like bow kind of headband. And she walked in, really sweet girl, was chatting. She was fine for a minute. She wasn't chatting too much. I could tell she was shy. And I go, wow, that's an awesome bow. Well, I singled her out. She didn't like her eyes on her, which is of course the classic social anxiety. I should have realized. She looked at the bow, threw it down, and ran out of the office. She eventually came back. I got her. But it's that idea that like, that's what I mean by singling out, or some people might ridicule, but just watch how you're paying attention to these types of anxious behaviors. Being too directive, which is really hard for all of us, at least for me. My job is to direct people and then tell them what to do. We want them to start to come up with the solutions on their own, or like if we're waiting for them to do or say something, we want to be patient and let them, not being too directive. Let them, if we know they know what they're supposed to do, giving them a little extra time, right? And obviously criticizing too much, which sometimes happens more in the realm of the parent-child dyad, where they're saying, why can't you do your schoolwork? You're never handing things on time. If that's a constant thing, and they have anxiety and it's not something that's really their choice, that's a hard thing for them to hear. That just seems to inflame the problem versus add much value to it. So how do we want to respond? How do we want to talk to kids with anxiety? You're brave, you're resourceful, you're a thinker. You don't have to do you can do any of these or none of these, but just gives you kind of a theme of how to like kind of say and encourage. You're a thinker, right? We want things that are neutral, like kind of not, we don't have to say you're good or bad, right? And that's where, bringing up that mindfulness. I really like to focus, and this is a whole nother rabbit hole we can go down, on not judging what they're saying, right? Being very descriptive. Right. So instead of I'm getting it wrong, no, I just am not, I'm slow at understanding X, Y, Z, right? Because wrong is very damaging. Bad is damaging. Good even is damaging. There isn't really good or bad. We want to focus on kind of that middle ground of describing what's going on versus judging, because that's what gets all these poor anxious kids in trouble. They're judging themselves. And we want them to describe more. So you have everything. This is a nice description. You have everything you need inside of you to cope. I say that all the time, like you can do this, you have everything inside you to do this. Don't let your mind tell you that you can't do hard things, because you absolutely can. So I just like this one. I think it's a good way of helping you frame how to speak and describe and kind of encourage kids when they're going through something hard. Again, we want to provide support really versus protection, right? We don't want to protect them from the world, because the world is tough and we can't protect them from everything. And so we would just be not helping them. So again, empathy, just listen, let them go, acceptance, and then back to, I have faith in you. If you want to probe, you can always probe and ask kids, but I tend to not always probe. What's going on in your head is a nice neutral way to tell them that you're supporting them. You can help them with problem solving, like I talked about. We do want them always not to avoid and gradually face their fears. And obviously, as a parent or even as a practitioner, to just say, ooh, social media, probably need to chill on it a little bit. It's not the most helpful thing. So what not to say with someone who has anxiety. So this is, again, tends to fall more in the parent or maybe teacher. But I have to say, like, I can't say that I didn't when I first started say, come on, try harder, So quit being dramatic. Don't say that. Come on, it's easy. Yeah, that invalidates, right? Pull yourself together. You're just being lazy, which is very common many times. And again, I'm sure my parents even said it when I wanted to avoid something. So this isn't bad, but it's just to be aware, right? You need to toughen up. When are you going to grow up? So these are the kids that aren't turning in their work or aren't raising their hands. You're crazy. Can't you just try harder? Instead, try one of these, which are a little bit better. I know this is hard for you. Take some time. It's okay. That's usually a good one. That's where I don't relent on what they have to do, but let's take some time, slow down. How can I help you? What do you need right now? So just also ways to calm them down while you're helping them if you notice them being inflamed and anxious. I see more than just your anxiety. I just want to talk about it. So just so you can start to get an idea of really how do we want to talk to them to elicit a helpful response versus shutting down, right? So the other one, they'll either shut down or feel invalidated. And we really want, and we also don't have to respond to their anxiety. I'm a behaviorist as well, but I think it's better, don't say any of the top ones. It'll just shut them down. So also for you, don't do it all on your own. Get it. Like I said, I love neuropsych assessments. Sometimes I can't do it all on my own. Sometimes I have no idea what's going on with this kid. Sometimes I don't have the right diagnosis, right? So make sure that you know where your specialty lies and comes and goes. And I always do that. Sometimes I need to talk to the teachers. Maybe they can't do this work. I have no idea. Maybe it is hard for them and they're going to know more. But ask for help. Make sure that you got plenty of different, if you need an expert, bring someone else in, right? And doing that by looking at your own bandwidth, which I feel like with COVID and all that's going on, it's important to keep checking in with yourself to make sure maybe you need extra help or maybe you don't. So self-care for the kids and even for us, right? But any day, it's really important that every day, I always say this when I show this to kids and the parents, it's important you're doing one of these things. I mean, this can be like the bottom one, even there is support, like talking to someone, texting someone in a day can be the one thing you do, right? Deep breathing is wonderful and counteracts the panic response fantastically. Many kids and teens don't want to do it. So mindfulness meditation can be good. Yoga to me, stretching, kids might be down to stretching. They do like stretching their necks, stretching their backs, doing some tension and relaxation. That's the progressive kind of muscle relaxation. Exercise. So maybe they don't want to do breathing. Fine. Then I want them to go for their run, right? Sports, any kind of sports. Okay, clubs that can do chess. Maybe robotics is the thing that gives them that stress reduction and that relaxation. Music. I love this one, and this one's hard to get my perfectionists to do, but I really pretty much prescribe it to them. Find something to do for fun and not be good at it. Something that you're not good at, right? Super, super helpful. Super helpful because it just helps you relax and have fun. I have one older client, older meaning like 20s, right? And I was like, okay, pottery, because pottery is tough, and not good at it. They really good at a bunch of other things. And can't say how many times she comes in and she's like, it wasn't right. And I'm like, that's the point. You're here just to like get used to it, see how it's doing, see if you have fun. If she doesn't have fun after about a whole session, I'll have her move on to something else. But like I said, socialization. So just chatting with friends, fine. You're not a marathon runner, no problem. Just finding someone to talk to is terribly important and helpful. So this is us. These are our current studies. We are see kids age 8 to 17. We do a psychiatric eval. And because we are a federal institution, everything is free of charge. So we don't take insurance. People always ask anything like that because that's what we do. We're a research institution. We do a medical eval because we didn't spend a lot of time on that. I mean, again, that's to me a whole other topic of all the different comorbid medical diagnoses that go with anxiety disorders. I get children with chronic pain, IBS, allergies, food allergies. There's many things that can go hand in hand. So we don't do that thorough of an exam, but I just think medical evaluations are terribly important so we know exactly what's going on with the kid. We offer cognitive behavioral therapy or medication. We don't have a medication trial now, but if the individual wants it, because some kids don't want to talk to me. I don't know why, I'm kidding. Some kids do not enjoy psychotherapy, and I say that's not worth it then. I mean, they have to be willing and want both the parents and the kid willing to take the medication. We don't kind of force anything. It's all up to parent and child choice. Because we're a research protocol, a child and parent have to say yes. So it's pretty clear on that. But some people just respond with medication. The classic study that compared medication to cognitive behavioral therapy to cognitive behavioral therapy plus medication. You got about 60% kids did better. Cognitive behavioral therapy, you got closer to 65%. And then you got about closer to 70% when they did both cognitive behavioral therapy and medication. Obviously for us, usually we do say, try therapy because there's no side effects except maybe they don't like to talk. But medication does come with side effects, so it's usually a good place to start. And for us, because we do fMRI research before they start the study, they can't be taking psychiatric meds because we want to see kind of what their brain is doing, and that will affect kind of, how their brain is reacting. So this is Lucy. She is the one that I believe you guys found very quickly. She's lovely. She's terribly responsive, way faster than me. So she always tracks me down, which is fine. If anyone needs me, she can track me down. And she is our nurse that's been there longer than I have and knows a lot about referrals and just all different programs. Even if we also, the NIMH has programs on ADHD, on irritability, on disruptive mood dysregulation. We have all kinds of protocols, ADHD, like all different types of any diagnoses. We are specifically the anxiety disorder group, but she can help with any questions or concerns. There are a lot of good resources out there. The NIMH has a page which has all kinds of fact sheets and information. Therapists that specialize in anxiety disorders, we tend to see at abct.org or adaa.org, which is the Anxiety Depression Association of America. So you're going to find people that are just very well versed. Taking Charge of ADHD, which you guys are probably aware of, Barkley and all that. That's one of the best books that I like the parents to always have. It just always helps for everyone to be on the same page. And Helping Your Anxious Child is an excellent book. And I usually say for parents or practitioners or anyone to get their feet, like, read the books first. And that may be all you need to help. Maybe all they need. So any questions, comments, things that we want to clarify?
Can we get a PDF copy of your presentation? A lot of good information, and I couldn't write fast enough.
I know. So good point. Brilliant point. Yes. I can definitely do that.
Thank you.
Let me write that down. It's late and I'm going to forget by tomorrow. So.
If somebody has anxiety, is that considered a depression as well? Or do they usually go hand in hand, or?
It depends. Most of our kids in our study, and even adults, you can have strictly an anxiety. You can have either one, just strictly an anxiety diagnosis. I do have plenty of patients who, let's say, like my socially anxious kids who aren't getting out and are not connecting with individuals, right? They will have depressive symptoms, but due to the social anxiety. Does that make sense? So they may not have depression independently. And then you can also have kids who have anxieties, a social anxiety disorder and depressive disorder, major depressive disorder. So they can be exclusive or they can be together. Or you can simply have depression as a byproduct symptoms of the anxiety disorder.
You said something that you can tell the difference with anxiety if the child is faking it, or you can tell if it's true. How do you do that?
I always have been a behaviorist at heart and my training. So it's like, again, this is my girl who said, oh, I'm not actually this poor girl. She's like, she said, I've done therapy before, like when we started 5 weeks ago. I'm not really that anxious. And like, we even give her a form that she has to like, it kind of clocks her anxiety every day. Right. So that's part of it. We're also working a lot on like, can an app help like manage? She's like, I don't really answer any of these. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then and I said, well, why don't you write that essay? Just a sentence, like just for me, I'm not going to grade you. Like, I don't care. Like, when you watch behavior that they can't do something, that to me is I'm a more behaviorist to watch, specifically kids and adolescents, because they may hide it, or they may, again, if you see like any irregularity to the symptoms, then I might say that's not really anxiety. That's something else. And it could simply be ADHD. It could be depression, but you try and kind of look for what do the behaviors look like? What can they do and what can't they do?
Could you give a definition more so of OCD? How does that play out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the reasons we don't touch on it a lot is because it's really more basal ganglia based, right? So we do know that it's kind of a separate, it's now in the impulse control disorders. However, there's plenty of anxiety that goes with obsessive compulsive disorder. So just so you know, that's the only reason like I kind of don't go into it, but the treatment is very similar with OCD. And also, so obsessive compulsive disorder is either a thought, image, or impulse. So some people will just say, I get an urge, like they'll say, I don't even have a thought, but I have an urge to wash my hands, right? Okay, some will have an actual thought. And there's different types of OCD. They range in themes. So it can be like contamination worries. So worry about getting sick or getting someone else sick. You can have scrupulosity, which is sometimes hits like religious kind of areas. So whether they're overly conscious of certain rules to a area that they're not able to function in the world, right? There is harming OCD actually, where people are worried about either harming themselves or harming others. There is hoarding falls under OCD in a way. There's also kind of more classic ones where it's called just right OCD, and they have to do something till it kind of feels just right, whether it's tapping, whether it's touching two things, whether it's saying something. So it's a thought, an image, or an impulse. Some will just get images. Then there's usually a compulsion around it. The compulsion can be physical or mental. So let's give it my anxious worrier about, catching, a disease. I have one now, worry about rabies, right? Okay. And so it's constantly checking, did I touch the cat? Did I touch the cat's saliva? And they can check physically if they're home, or they'll even do mental rituals or checking in their mind, right? So it can be either physical rituals or it can be mental rituals. And usually, like you said, they're doing it for more than an hour a day, and it's distressing to them. So that's a real snapshot of obsessive compulsive disorder. You use medication or a version of cognitive behavioral therapy. Exposure response prevention is a specific way that you treat obsessive compulsive disorder. Any more specific questions? Because it's very, very important and an interesting one that goes many times hand in hand with anxiety or other diagnoses.
What are some of the biological problems that might cause anxiety? You mentioned allergies, you mentioned IBS.
Chronic pain, seems to be, there's many different, and I guess it depends on the kid and the adolescent. The other ones I'm trying to think, many individuals with celiac as well, you can get that many times. And the list is kind of, I have to look up, there's a good study, which I could send around if you want, that kind of lists it more thoroughly than kind of what I know off the top of my head. And I can write that down and send it around in a PDF if you want, because there's a pretty significant list of that. So
thank you.
POTS as well. I'll see a lot of individuals with POTS. I'm just trying to think of the ones that I see more common, but it tends to be IBS, chronic pain, POTS are the ones.
How about autism? There's high anxiety, social issues, executive function problems. How do you view that?
Right. So, and I think it's very, I had an old presentation I did on with anxiety and autism. And I think the rate is like 70%, I would bet, right? I mean, probably anecdotally from any of yours experience, where if you're having an autism diagnosis, 70% of those individuals will also carry an anxiety diagnosis as well. And obviously you can think of it in many ways of why they would have anxiety, whether it's a sensory issue, whether it's a verbal issue, a communication issue. There's so many reasons that I think, and obsessive compulsive disorder is very common with individuals on the spectrum as well. So yes, you get into many diagnoses once you work with individuals on the spectrum, I feel like.
I have a question about
Could you talk a little bit about selective mutism? Sorry.
Yeah, I can do selective mutism because I think that's an interesting one. And then think someone else said something too.
Yeah.
Selective mutism is really an interesting one. Many times with that goes oppositional defiant disorder. It's very common that those kids are a little bit more defiant and into kind of issues of control. Again, it's something that happens. My cat. Sorry, hold on. I have to let my cat in. No, we're in a break. Hold on. She's gonna go. Okay, come in. Okay. Since we're gonna, okay. Otherwise, she was gonna make lots and lots of noise. So it's where they're only speaking in the house and they speak freely and very comfortably. So that's the other thing. There's usually not, there can be speech delays, but it's many times hard to identify because the parents would have to come from the parents. Also, many times selective mutism comes from dual language, like a risk factor is dual language families as well. And they do not speak in the classroom or very minimally. A lot of those kids too will many times have a friend that kind of translates for them, or a preferred teacher or individual that will do that as well. The protocol is the same for treatment. Medication and cognitive behavioral therapy work well, where you slowly and gradually introduce them to speaking. But I have to say what a lot of the research is showing is it's very difficult to generalize sorry, you're gonna get to see my cat. It's very hard to generalize what they learn in session to different settings. So I haven't read a lot of why that is, but it's why it's very important that if I have a patient, that I'm also working a lot with schools, speech pathologists, like everyone, that they're doing the same practice that I'm doing, and the child is consistently practicing it across the board. So.
What about eating disorders?
Oh yes, of course. Go hand in hand with anxiety disorders. Yes, they do. For sure. It is very common comorbid diagnosis. So especially with the generalized anxiety disorder and eating disorders. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to try again. We do a lot of work. My group does a lot of work with executive functioning. And so we get many children who have diagnoses of ADHD and anxiety, or ADHD and a language problem and anxiety, or they're not diagnosed with anxiety, but as soon as you put them in a situation of written language, everything, they can't do it. What we have used, and so I wanted to ask you about this, we have really seen kids that really can't write anything. So like you were saying, I have nothing to write. I don't know what to write. I can't get it. I can't get the thoughts out of my head, take them from my head. And if we break it down to the point where we're just being the secretary for them, even if they say little words, and we take all that down, and then we can say, these are all your words. See, you can do this. So I find that showing them or modeling even helps lower the anxiety.
Definitely.
Do you agree with that?
100%. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. It would be like a good intermediate step, right?
Right.
Right. That's how I would see it. Like if that's the only way I can get them to do it, then that's a brilliant intermediate step. Eventually I want them writing it, right?
Right.
But if they can't, right, it's showing them, right? And they're just scared. I mean, they're scared, they're frozen, right? So can't get it out. And if you can get it out another way, yeah. And then usually the other one I do is like, well, let's think of a topic you like that you can write about, right? Or more about, right? Because it's also a knowledge-based anxiety sometimes, right? Like, well, I don't know that much about it. So
Right.
Mhm.
Even
Thank
if they could speak about it, just speak there and then tape it somehow or have them go back then. And
Exactly. That's brilliant. And that's kind of also how you work with kind of these selective mutism kids, because sometimes they actually won't even talk to anybody. So then you have them at home, record their voice. And then you have that voice, you give it to the teacher or the speech pathologist or, right? So you're correct. Like, I think that's a really good point of where a lot of people miss. That's why I'm glad you gave up that example, is all the intermediate steps. There are tons. And that's really our job, to find those intermediate steps so they can eventually get there. Right? Because many times schools say, no, just write it. And there's many steps in between. So great point.
I'm very much into assistive technology, and I think a lot of people are really missing the boat. I mean, there's so many. I just did a spotlight session on speech to audio recording, because everybody goes right to voice recognition or speech recognition. And that can be hard, especially for these kids who are perfectionists, because they get distracted when they have to make everything perfect. But if you use an extension like Mote or Kesana, like there are a whole bunch of them, and they're really inexpensive or free. And they can just record short audio snippets, and some of them transcribe. You can then grab the transcriptions and they have everything written out.
Yeah.
So
that's a great point. No, and I think that it even helps any of the kids that I have we didn't talk about, my kids have dysgraphia, and that's also what's impeding. Like I mean, you guys are well versed in this, so I can say, there's so many different things that can do that, yeah, let's not force the kid to continually write, that way. Let's use the keyboard or, like you write, dictate, and because that's what's stopping them from learning or producing what they need to produce. So, excellent point. Any other questions and comments? I know I can tell it's late.
Some sort of MRIs that you use. What else do you use? Are they fMRIs or?
So we use fMRIs mostly just to map the connectivity and what is kind of responding more frequently to certain tasks that we're doing. We don't use it to diagnose though. There's still not enough data really to look at the brain and be able to say that in anxiety disorders. I'm not as familiar with other ones, but we use it more to help refine understanding and hopefully refine treatment so we can get even better treatment for these kids.
And then with phobias or where the anxiety disorder, I'm thinking is attached to a specific factor. I've certainly known adults with phobias about driving or driving through a tunnel. I knew someone, and they had the treatments were things like progressive desensitization based on the anxiety that was attached to a specific area. I think that's in contrast to the generalized disorder, correct?
It is in a way. The generalized, I mean, just anecdotally, yeah, I mean, yes, you're correct. It is, to me, it's also harder to treat the generalized anxiety disorder kids, so because it moves. It's more like we could say it in a funny way. It's like whack-a-mole. You hit one, you get the one, and then the next one comes up, versus a specific phobia or the driving or the tunnel. You can get very kind of focused and, get a handle on it. So when I have my GAD kids who I'm having a hard time making any headway, if they have a phobia, I do start there, because then they can learn that if they face their fears, that eventually it gets okay, if that makes sense, but that they're gonna have to keep doing it over and over again, the poor GAD kids, because something new will pop up later on. But yeah, it's definitely harder, and you work more also on like rumination and how they handle rumination as well.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should look at the chats to see if there's any questions there that weren't.
Kitty girl.
Great to see everyone.
Looking. Someone did ask, are they excluded if they have ASD and anxiety? Not necessarily. It depends how severe, kind of, where is mild, moderate. So it doesn't exclude. Someone asked if NIH is doing any adult studies on adult OCD. I am not sure. I'm not sure if they are. The adult stuff I don't know as well. They're definitely not doing kids stuff. We do work with kids with selective mutism for sure. And then the back to basics slide. I can go back. There we go. Any other questions or comments? You ever wrote that Fragile X has a high rate as well for anxiety disorders. I tried to cover a lot in a small amount of time. So,
Good, great.
thank you.
Have you ever worked with a speech pathologist on a selective mutism case?
Yes, for sure. Because I have had some kids where when they finally start speaking, it is clear that, and the parents either didn't pick up on it because it was in another, like they were speaking at home in a different language, So yes, definitely for sure. I tend to consult with them at least first too, because that many times can be a little bit a source of anxiety, right? If there's some level of difficulty that they're having, and that they need that help as well.
So what would be any advice for us as a group of speech pathologists that you'd like us to know and working with you?
I think what I liked, and I think you guys already, I'm sure actually this is what I'm sure you're really good at, is all the intermediate steps to get somewhere, correct? So I always think it's like breaking things down, and you guys are probably really well versed at that. And that's where a lot of people miss the boat with anxious kids. They're just either like, we were just giving the example of writing, like say this and you got to say it, you got to give the presentation. No, always making sure that there's all these intermediate steps eventually for them to succeed. Because what's cool about all of you is you're always trying to have them say it or pronounce it, or you're all trying to get them to an end goal, and so you naturally are all kind of good exposure therapists, because for me, I know where they need to go, and I'm not going to say, no, you can't do this, eventually we'll get there, but let's figure out all the steps in between. So I think, most importantly, just noticing it too in kids who are socially anxious. If you notice that, and maybe a lot of people miss anxious kids, miss that part, they don't diagnose it. They go overlooked because many of them are quiet and thoughtful, and the school or the parents will pick up on the speech issue, but maybe not pick up on that they're also not talking to anyone or they have no friends, So I think if you notice it, I think it's always important to bring up to school or parents. And you don't have to say, oh, they have an anxiety disorder, but just hey, that's probably your best role is helping these kids that many times go overlooked,
I have a question about the, you had mentioned, Dr. Berman, that there is a higher rate of selective mutism among children in dual language families. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, it does show that's the confidence in the second language, right? And it's usually the family really is a primarily speaking, whether it's Spanish or, that kind of thing. So it is lack of confidence and practice. So it seems to be. And then you usually also so they have that, and then again, oppositional defiant disorder seems to also be the other key kind of component that needs to be part of it. So just not just dual language, but that plus and trauma as well also. So you want to kind of watch out for all of those together.
Thank you.
Somebody just asked about selective mutism in twins.
Selective mutism in twins. I'd have to look that up. I don't know if there's any anecdotal or if anyone has had that. It makes sense in a way if you have one, maybe, because then the other one can speak for the other one. In a way? That is, I do see anxiety disorders in twin pairs, because one can kind of accommodate the other, but more because of that than just both, which is interesting.
I was the one that posed the question, and it was many years ago that I saw two kids. They were in kindergarten, never spoke in school. Their parents claimed that they spoke at home. I believe it was so many years ago, I don't remember, but I think they may have been from a bilingual family. And they got to the point where they would talk in therapy with the two of them together. And as soon as, it was the most fascinating thing I'd ever seen. As soon as I introduced another kid from their class that they were that they knew, the teacher and I worked together to handpick the child, They didn't say a word.
Yeah, it is. It's very striking. I mean, it's exactly what we're saying. They do it at home and then maybe a little bit they eventually, but that's why the generalization of it's so tricky. And there's a couple good, the one good practice, what Alvord Baker and Associates does do a really good summer program for selective mutism kids. You almost really need like an intensive program where they're like thrown into a million different situations. But yeah, it's a very striking. I mean, they literally will, like, I have definitely sat in a session for 45 minutes just in silence, but that's kind of like, just like, because the idea is they have to get used to you as a being, right? So.
Yeah, oh, we did all of that. We did all the transitions. They felt comfortable. We tested it with, we worked with the psychologist, we worked with the teacher. We felt that they were at the point of being able to be introduced to somebody else in their classroom. It was a disaster.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
It is very interesting. Yeah. And it literally just takes piece by piece. And then some of these kids like kind of not spontaneously remit, but like then in about 3 years later, they just want to talk and they can talk, like, because they've been talking at home, maybe, but I definitely have some that just all of a sudden now they're feeling like it. Yeah, I have one right now who went through the summer camp and then came like summer camp at Albert Baker and still had a little bit left, just couldn't get the presentations in class. And really wanted to, like was a good student. And the way, and it was just, I hit it the right one, is she loved animals. So I had her present on every animal, first to me, then someone else. And I got all the nurses from the NIH, I just bring in person. It was literally like just running people through, like they just pop their head in and have her keep presenting. But it took a while. I mean, it took many years. She had years of therapy first before she came to me to kind of like get the last bit of it undone. But yeah, they're very fascinating cases.
Where can we find information about qualifications for the research studies?
Okay. So, I mean, you can always call Lucy. That's probably the best number to call. Like I said, we see kids 8 to 17 who are generally medically healthy. I mean, we have kids with chronic pain and IBS, but just generally medically healthy and are not taking psychiatric meds. That's just the big rule out, which a lot of kids are, whether it's for ADHD or different things. So those are the, they must be medically healthy and not be taking any psychiatric meds. That's kind of our big rule outs.
Anybody else have any questions?
Is it more important to have the child happy with his new coping skills or the parents? And what do you, I mean, give me more, because it's so interesting, because I actually have a school refuse. I mean, there's so many things we can go down. I have a school refuser that I'm only just treating the parents and it's doing great. So there is there's many different ways to treat anxiety, medication, individuals therapy, and the parents, it's more important for the kid, honestly. But some kids don't want to come in, and there's parents that are really making huge missteps. Like we were saying, like they're not creating the intermediate steps, or they're relenting too easily. So there is a new interesting protocol where you only treat the parents, and it seems to have pretty good results of then the kid getting over the diagnoses. But it kind of has to fit a certain set of kind of circumstances.
What about if the parent has a lot of anxiety? I mean, how does that trickle down to the child?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what's interesting is studies were done. So yes, I think if that's why I prefer to treat either one or the other, right? So the parent or the kid, both together gets tricky unless it's just to teach the parent, hey, do this when the kid is doing this, right? But actually, if you have a child with anxiety disorder and you treat the anxiety disorder and it works pretty well, the parent's anxiety disorder actually goes down, which is really interesting. It doesn't go away, but by treating the kid, it can help. And yes, you do need to, address any accommodating issues that the parent may be having. And that's why usually when I do the parent talks, it's a lot more on like accommodation and avoidance and them tolerating distress, them tolerating the kid being upset, which is many times very hard for an anxious parent. but definitely there's definitely some genetic component for sure.
Okay, I was going to ask that, or just living in the house with the anxious parent, do kids pick up on that? And then
Yeah, like modeling, like how do I react to something? Oh, like, oh, I'm not supposed to touch that surface. It's dangerous. It's dirty. You know, oh, that's what I should do. I should stay away from that, you know? Yep, definitely modeling. So can play a role. It's true. Someone wrote a mother's only as happy as their sickest child, right? I mean, that's what they need. They should have named the study that. That would have, people would have read that article then. It's just a very good article, but it doesn't have that good of a title.
Well, Dr. Berman, I want to thank you, and I see all these other people that have written in with how much information you were able to give us, and all the resources. It's been very interesting for me. It seems that way for everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Berman.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just have, before we say goodbye, did these people check in? Sue Belsky, Beth Dweck, Karen Hawkins, Malka Koretsky, Brooke Kotick, Yolanda Mathrani, Laura Scalzi, Carrie Scheel, or Ermin Vandy. Have any of you checked in and I missed you? No. Okay. Okay, so I want to remind everybody to check the link to complete the evaluation questions and send them in, and hopefully within the next week or so, I'll be able to print out the CEU forms. So be patient on that. That takes a lot of time.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you.
For having me.
Again, Dr. Berman, thank you so much.
Everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, everybody.